This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Thank you so much for meeting with me today. So if you don't mind, we're going to start with your name, your pronouns, and if you could just give me a brief introduction about yourself, where you come from, what year you are, what university.
Okay, yeah. So I'm Nicolette Salmi, which is a mouthful. I'm a senior in CAS. My mom's Norwegian and my dad was like Finnish, Swedish. And yeah, I'm at BU. Is there anything I missed?
Pronouns?
Oh, pronouns, she, her.
And if you wouldn't mind, would you be able to spell out your first name for me?
Okay, Nicollette.
All right. So you mentioned where your parents are from, but where does your name specifically come from?
Okay, yeah. So my parents are both like really Scandinavian, so they wanted a Scandinavian name for me. And they thought I was a boy. They just had a hunch that I was going to be a boy. So my name was supposed to be Nikolai, which is definitely more Scandinavian. But then obviously they wanted to give me a female name. So then they kind of just changed the ending. But obviously like Nikolai is very Scandinavian and Nicolette is obviously more like, I guess you could call it French, but it sounds like more UK. It's more common in the UK and America. And then yeah, so like all of my names are kind of Scandinavian influence except for my first name.
Okay.
And then obviously at BU that got shortened to like Nicole or Nikki, which is like very like a massive dissonance from like what my name actually is supposed to be. But I feel like that's just like normalized that like, I mean, I don't think it's a hard name to pronounce. I think it's kind of like phonetically, I think it makes sense. But a lot of like either professors or students just shorten my name kind of. I mean, Nicole just annoys me a little bit, but like it's like a bit, it feels a bit like odd for them to like informally refer to you as something that you haven't like explicitly said that you are okay with. I don't know. I think it's a bit strange to be like referred to in my department by like a nickname that I like haven't shared with them. But yeah.
Right. And would you consider that a mispronunciation of your name?
I definitely think like Nikki makes more sense to me, like, and I'm more okay with that because it like, I guess that it's like two syllables instead of three, and like that makes sense. And like people call me Nikki like outside of school, but Nicole I like think of as like really like lazy mispronunciation because it's just like shaving off 3 letters of my name because they're not. I don't know. I feel like that is when I hear it, I'm like they've just not been bothered to like read my name.
Right. And would you argue that maybe it's a deliberate mispronunciation as part of a microaggression? Do you think they're, antagonistic towards you?
I mean, not in the way that like other people struggle with like names, and it's more like I feel like because it's Scandinavian, which is like more common in the US, it's not like a microaggression. It's just kind of especially like an international student, it's like a bit like lazy for them to like not like learn how to actually pronounce your name, just kind of go with whatever suits them. So I wouldn't think of it as a microaggression, just kind of shows how if you don't have an American sounding name, they're very quick to like kind of make it fit with them rather than like learn how to pronounce it.
So you say American, but I just was curious if you wouldn't mind telling me a bit about your background in terms of, where you grew up. Was it in a Scandinavian country? Was it anywhere else?
So I grew up in London, but my family like had like my entire Norwegian side of my family was all living there at the same time. So and especially like London, I feel has a lot of Scandinavian presence just because I mean like geographically that makes sense, and like a lot of people from Norway and Sweden don't go that far abroad. So it was, I mean, I'd never had issues in London growing up that people would shorten my name. Like I maybe would ask someone to shorten my name, but it would never be the other way around that I have here. And then I grew up in Switzerland, which was the same thing, very international. So people like make an effort to make sure they're pronouncing your name correctly. And I think that's why it was so surprising in college that like teachers and classmates had been able to like pronounce my name correctly or without shortening it until like from ages 0 to 18. And then suddenly you're an adult and like adults around you don't make that same effort. It was a bit of a culture shock for sure.
Right. And going back to the broader meaning about it. Is there different ways of spelling your name, pronouncing your name? Is there a meaning or an interpretation behind it that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so what my name was supposed to be, which was Nicolai, is like Nicolai. And that is obviously, I cannot imagine how difficult that must have, like, that would have been if I had to like go in pronouncing that. And around like 15, 16, my mom did want me to change my name back to the original meaning, because I mean, the whole thing about like gendered names being like, she thought that I wouldn't be comfortable with a male name and I'd be bullied, but I didn't really have a problem with that. And like, I have family members who refer to me as Nick, so I wasn't like, I didn't have an issue with that per se. But I do think that like we were talking about it and I was like, there's no one at school who's going to be able to pronounce that. That's going to be such a hassle. And even though it is like what my name originally was, it would have been such a pain just because of like school and jobs and like, especially being in America, that no one will be able to pronounce it. So that's why I decided not to. It means victory of the people, which is definitely like my dad's idea, like having his first child. He wanted it to mean like, he wanted to name my sister like Alexander Magnus, to me like the great. So it's definitely like these old Scandinavian like adjacent names that are supposed to like evoke greatness. But obviously, I mean, I struggled. I didn't like my name growing up because I thought it was a bit like whiny and like I felt like it was like lacking what my name should have had, like, which is more symbolic and obviously more Scandinavian. My cousins all have very Scandinavian names, and my sisters have very either like Russian or Scandinavian names, except for me. But
I have two questions. Which name were you talking about when you're talking about this greatness? Is that Nikolai or Nicolette?
so the beginning, like Nick, I mean, I think I could be stretching a bit, but like Nick in the Greek means victory. So like that part of the word means victory. But I think Nikolai specifically, like in the etymology of Scandinavian, like directly evokes that. Whereas Nicolette is kind of, because it's like a feminized version of it and it's more French, it doesn't have that same etymological meaning, I think.
And
But yeah.
is it common in your culture to have variations of a name based by gender? So, I mean, at least in Middle Eastern culture, you can have Malik and then you can have Melika. Does that exist, or was yours sort of like a deliberate attempt at, you know, retaining its original meaning but just feminizing it, as you've said?
I think it's less common in Scandinavian. I mean, names are very different. Just like thinking about like some of my family members' names that I would never. I mean, my cousin went to school in Vermont, and his name is Erling Konstantin Samuelson Krog. And when he was getting his diploma, they were like Erling Samuelson, and like just brutalized his name. So I don't think it's like more of a gender thing. I definitely think that it wasn't surprising that I think, okay, yes, Nikolai, the inverse will be Nicolina, but which is surprising that my parents didn't go that route. But I think because Nicolina was more specifically Norwegian, broadly Scandinavian, my dad wanted me to have more of an in-between name. And honestly, I came out as a girl and they like made a very quick decision just to change the ending. But yeah, I think it was supposed to be a feminized version, but it kind of lost that original meaning. And I think it was also like, I'm born in London, so I think they did want to make it like Nikolai is one thing, but Nicolina is like a lot to like introduce your 4-year-old at like primary school as Nicolina. So I was, especially in London. So I think that was like a very early instance of like them changing my name to like fit the culture I was growing up in more than fit the culture that I was from.
Okay. And you were born in London?
Yes.
Okay. What does your name mean to you? Is it a source of pride? Are you sometimes ashamed by it? What's in it? What does Nicolette mean to you?
I mean, I didn't like it growing up, especially because of how it was like Nikki or Nicole, which was like really grating for me to hear just because I felt very like separate from my name. and I felt like it didn't reflect me as a person, especially with how easily like Americanized my name can be. I really struggled with that, but it's just like a habit for people, so it was too difficult for me to like correct people. And I didn't like, I mean, I go through phases. I think like sometimes like I don't know why I feel like I have a massive dissonance in my name, especially because of like how Scandinavian or French my sister's name are, or my parents' name. I feel like I have the most American name, and that kind of makes me feel a bit, I feel like it doesn't match me, but I can't just change my name at like 21 years old. So I've grown to be okay with it, but no, I didn't like it growing up.
Would you change it if you could today? Take a pen and paper and go and change it.
I was actually thinking about it when I was thinking about this interview like 2 days ago. I was like, is that absolutely ridiculous? Because I'm thinking of changing my last name to my mom's maiden name. And I think I might have debated it if I wasn't planning on changing my last name. I feel like if I just changed both elements of my name, I would feel a bit like lost from my like original identity. But I have definitely thought about it. Or I don't know, it feels a bit rude to tell teachers like I don't want to be referred to as this, but it's better than them reading the paper and like mispronouncing it. So maybe I'll start colloquially going by something else or a different variation of my name after I leave university.
So speaking of, do you have maybe a full-time nickname or a general nickname when you were growing up, or as of today? If so, which one was your favorite and who would call you these names?
I feel like Nikki was the most common, which is also strange because it is obviously like a direct, straightforward nickname from Nicolette, but everyone always said it was like a boy's name when I was growing up, and it always sounded very like out of place. So that was my most common nickname, but I definitely was not a fan of it. And then Nick is what my godfather and my dad used to call me. So that is maybe one of my favorites just because I don't know why, I felt like Nicolette as a feminine name sounded so whiny, but Nick sounded like more curt, and like, I guess like the like E on the end really always really annoyed me. My mom calls me Nini, which is like, I'm not a massive fan of it. I mean, I like when she calls me that, but if people referred to me that at school, I would be extremely weirded out. But yeah, I wasn't really a nickname person growing up. It's only become like recently, especially in American college, that that people refer to me explicitly by my nickname, which is, I mean, how do I explain it? Like people not close to me or people who don't know me out of school will refer to me as a nickname. Feels a bit like too personal and too, I don't know if I'm describing that correctly, but it feels more private than, if that makes sense.
And so, are there scenarios where you decide to go by this alter ego, declare yourself as a different name? I mean, it can be something as small as going into Starbucks and when they ask you your name, you give them something else. Are you one of those people? Do you have, a backup name, I guess we can call it?
I use Nick a lot. It confuses a lot of Uber drivers, but that's just the easiest thing. And I feel like it's so strange. My mom changes her name when she goes to Starbucks, but it's like such a change in pronunciation that it feels almost like she's putting on a character. And I feel like that's such a strange element, but I guess that's so normalized for people that they're going to go into spaces, and to make it easier, they're just going to completely change their name. But I didn't really want to do that. So I go by Nick in most cases, like Starbucks or Ubers. But I don't know. I still get a weird reaction from some people, even though, I mean, names shouldn't be gendered, but I still do get a very weird reaction from some people, which is very strange to me, but.
Right. And how would you say that the name Nicolette influences you as a person, in terms of your personality, your academic life, your life goals? Does it?
I don't know. I mean, I was thinking about like other Nicolettes in the world, and I don't think there is one. So I mean, all these like famous names of people who are super successful like seem to be like more punchy, more like how am I describing this so badly? I'm not sure. I feel very strange about it because, I mean, thinking about the whole thing about like gender, and if I was to get married, to like lose my name feels like a loss of like my accomplishments through that name. So I was even thinking about like changing my name before graduation in terms of my last name, but then having a weird amount of like documents or achievements with my dad's last name versus my mom's last name, I thought it would be super weird to make that change, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay. And on that note, have you ever felt isolated by your name?
What do you mean by isolated?
Well, it could mean something as simple as, standing out. It's an eclectic name, it's different. Or do you feel isolated in a sense of, I'm different, people are looking at me inwardly, that sort of aspect?
I think I have more of that with my last name for sure, just because it's very, very Finnish, whereas my first name is more of a watered down Scandinavian name. So I think I have it more with my last name, and that's where I feel more offense when people mispronounce it. But not so much with my first name, just kind of, I mean, like maybe like during ceremonies when people like read out the names, it feels like a bit like not being singled out, but it feels more like distinctively like has a reaction from certain people, whereas like a name that's a bit more common doesn't have that. But I do recognize that I definitely have an easier name to pronounce than people in other regions of the world, and that because of how Scandinavian and English languages like share the same alphabet, and like phonetically how you pronounce stuff are similar. I don't have that as much as other people do, but compared to the like classic Jane Doe, a little bit, but not a lot.
Okay. And with that pronunciation idea, when people mispronounce it naturally, and don't necessarily ask for correction, do you step in and tell them, no, it's pronounced like this? Or do you just leave it?
So the instance of I had a professor at BU who called on me a lot in lecture, and he had like my name printed out, and he would always call me Nicole. And I wasn't allowed to like go in front of like 120 people and be like, that's not my name. But it was very, I felt inconsiderate to just, I mean, he could read it, but I felt like it was very inconsiderate to not like make an effort. I have a lot of professors who will be like, do you go by anything else, or how do you pronounce this, and like correct me if I'm doing it wrong. But I guess in big lecture halls, I will not correct professors if they mispronounce it. Airplane hostesses always mispronounce my name, and that I don't say anything, but it feels very aggressive. Like boarding a plane and they mess up my first and last name, it just sounds very like grating on the ears. But I'm not gonna like argue with like a hostess. So most of the time I feel like I don't say anything, unless it's like someone who I see in my personal life that would start to annoy me on like a regular basis.
Okay. And with that, I mean, you've given examples of where someone has given your name maybe on a piece of paper, or they're reading it out loud. But let's say you were in their shoes and you were given a roster and you had to read out names and pronounce some that you've never heard before, never seen before. Do you feel uncomfortable having to do that? Theoretically, if you've never done that, would you? What would be your approach to doing that?
I definitely feel like when certain professors read off the list of students, I do feel that when they come across a name they've never heard about, are very uncomfortable, like fearing that they're going to get it wrong. And I definitely think I would be the same in that situation. So I don't know how I would approach it. Maybe I think it's a very good practice to go around in smaller classes, to go around and introduce yourself, and then to listen out to help the students pronounce their name, or if they want to go by anything else. I had a professor who wrote a questionnaire before where you put your name, and then if you want to be referred to as anything differently when class started, she would do that. So I feel like it's more like listening at the beginning and making sure you understand the pronunciation. But I feel like that is only really well fostered in smaller classes. In bigger lectures, I think with teachers who are teaching like 200 students a semester, they're not going to make the effort. which is why I feel like I'm more understanding of someone in a lecture saying my name wrong than someone in a small seminar.
And there's no harm in asking if you've maybe been ever racially profiled by your name, you know, maybe in an airport, going through job interviews when you check boxes and these sorts of things. Do you feel sometimes that you might get certain looks associated with stereotypes or?
No, not really at all, but I feel like that is kind of a weird thing that's like happened in like the post-Trump era of America, where it's they're very against immigrants, but it's like select immigrants are okay. So I've not experienced that because I'm from a country that they deem like okay to be an immigrant, and which is very bad, and it really does show how like racialized like the xenophobic othering of America has become. But no, I haven't had that, and that's I think because of how I look and like the fact that there's no weird letters in my name that aren't common in like the English alphabet. So no.
And is there anything else you'd like to add to the conversation about what's in a name?
What's in a name? I can't think of anything right now.
You don't have to. It's just a final thought if there's anything, you know, maybe something to do with the dissonance of maybe it being an American issue. You know, there is American exceptionalism in the world when it comes to these things, because maybe, you know, okay, yes, Boston is a microcosm, but maybe on the wider scale, it's not this melting pot.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I do think that with how much America talks about like the whole melting pot and how US universities really say like these are statistics for how international people are, they're not quick to try to like they will accept students, yes, but a lot of the culture is so towards Americanism and like this is the American issues that people are dealing with and this and this and this, and even taking like a course that I did this summer in London with a lot of American students, it's I think an American instinct, if I can like speak so broadly, to just apply their mind view onto everyone. So it's like if I can't pronounce your name, like you have a difficult name and you should be able to like immediately be amenable to me and you should change your name so that I can pronounce it other than like let me sit down and actually like try to pronounce this name. I feel like it's very, and I mean, America is like the hegemon of the world, but I think that with that power and influence on like the world order, it's become like very culturally lazy. And you see that like in people, in like some Americans when they travel, they have no interest in actually going to the places beyond like partying or like tourist traps, but they're not actually there to see the culture. It's more, I don't know how to explain it. It feels very superficial, like the internationalism, the melting pot that America uses as its identifier, but it feels very shallow, if that makes sense.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you for taking the time. Very much enjoyed this conversation. And I'm going to end the interview here.
Do I leave?